The years that followed the reconstruction of the Civil War were marked by prosperity for some, extreme poverty for others, and an era for great economic growth for plenty, as well as the birth of significant companies and big businesses in the United States.
By the late 19th century, the dust from the bloodiest war in American history had already settled, and the US had entered a new phase which revolved around the creation of gigantic companies that continue to exist to this day, and the rise of an old French doctrine in North America known as the laissez-faire capitalism. Critiques to this philosophy of business will be the wealth of nations.
Laissez-faire translates to let be or to let live. The laissez-faire doctrine opposed any interference with commerce and economy from the government. The laissez-faire capitalism allowed a shift on the way the country was run because the richest and biggest business owners became more powerful. Written by a Scottish scholar, Adam Smith published the book of The Wealth of Nations during the 18th century. This was undeniably the most important work that was done for better explaining political economy. Smith's work showed an in-depth examination of how capitalism works and the power of the so-called invisible hand, otherwise meaning the regulating effects of the free market. Moving on to the terms that are needed to understand this time of business, the first I will speak about is monopoly. So, what exactly is a monopoly? A monopoly is a company that has no competitors within their marketplace. When an industry is monopolized, they will have only one company that will provide their product and or services to their customers. Monopolies ran rampant during the Gilded Age, and one example of that would be how John D. Rockefeller used horizontal integration to create a monopoly in the oil industry. The following term is a conglomerate, which is when a large corporation starts to take charge and own many different businesses in unrelated industries. Conglomerates have three different mergers: market extension mergers, product extension mergers, and pure conglomerate mergers. Market extension mergers can be seen as when you have two companies that sell the same products and or services but are based in different geographical locations and end up being owned by the same corporation. A product extension merger is when a corporation buys out two companies that rely on each other to stay in business. A pure conglomerate merger is when you combine firms in an unrelated market. An example of a conglomerate in the Gilded Age would be when J.P. Morgan bought General Electric and merged it with Edison General and Thomson Houston Electric companies. The next term is a pool. In a pool, competitors make informal agreements about how much they will be selling for and how much they plan on distributing. Many critics felt this was disruptive to the market, while many individuals who defended this type of business felt that it eliminated the irregularity and wastefulness of unregulated markets. Examples of pools would be when railroads were competing against other businesses. The next two terms, trust and holding company, technically they're different, but actually they were both used in the same way. What were they? They were large partnerships formed by possibly untrue competing companies in order to strengthen their control over the market without violating anti-monopoly laws. In these partnerships, the stock certificates from several companies were exchanged for a trust certificate, and then they create a board in which they're able to effectively create a monopoly without technically being called one. An example of a trust would be when Rockefeller took charge of the oil refinery industry.
The Gilded Age was remarkable because it was a time period in which rich company owners gained more relevance than political figures.
John Rockefeller, 1839 through 1937. John Rockefeller was involved with oil. Rockefeller started his business career at the young age of 19. He started a partnership with his brother and other associates who developed the Standard Oil Company, looking to drive down the cost of oil refining. John co-founded and grew the oil company to his best extent. The Standard Oil Company controlled up to 90% of oil business through shipping and refining. John Rockefeller was also a very wealthy man who also was very generous. He donated much of his wealth, like Andrew Carnegie, to the public through foundations and charities. He also donated his money to biomedical research, funding scientific investigations that resulted in vaccines to cure fevers. J.P. Morgan, 1837 through 1913. Morgan financed railroads and helped organize U.S. Steel, General Electric, and other major corporations. He followed his father into the banking business in the 1850s and in 1871 formed a partnership with a banker of the name of Andrew Drexel. In 1895 they named their business J.P. Morgan and Company, which later became what we know as J.P. Morgan Chase. Morgan used his influence to help stabilize American financial markets during the several economic crises, including the Panic of 1907. However, he faced criticism that he had too much power and was accused of manipulating the nation's financial system for his own gain. His healthy enterprise made him extremely wealthy. Morgan donated a good sum of his money to the church and other charities. Later, Morgan also created a conglomerate after Andrew Carnegie retired by taking over his steel company. Andrew Carnegie, 1835 through 1919. The richest man in the world, as some people like to call him, was the Steel King. Carnegie invested into several iron companies. One was the Keystone Bridge Company, which built iron railroad bridges. He also purchased a stock in an oil company and in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company, which manufactured railroad sleeping cars. He invested a large amount of his time into the steel company and the rail system. Carnegie went through many economic challenges, yet he still managed to expand his business, due to steel being in such high demand. He was an excellent businessman, and he made a large sum of money, which he ended up donating about half to various associations. He retired at the age of 66 and founded the Carnegie Institution to fund scientific research.
Jay Gould was a railroad speculator who was kicked out of the Erie Railroad. Later, he saw the big picture and decided to buy his way into the Union Pacific. Once he gained control of the Union, Gould became the 9th richest man in America's history. He was associated with monopoly since he controlled the Union Pacific. Gould was able to manage the trading system and what came through by bribing Congress. Henry Ford was an industrialist who worked for Thomas Edison, with whom he created the horseless carrier. He developed the mass production of interchangeable parts. In 1913, he created the first moving assembly on the manufacturing of cars. Ford distrusted any charitable organizations. However, he did create some organizations himself. Ford helped Detroit get a modern medical center. He took over the project by doing all the funding.
The Gilded Age was filled with a growing economic development, as the big companies and industries gained more money and more power, so did their owners and their families. Families such as the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers showcased their wealth through conspicuous consumptions. These families would often broadcast their high-class status by building extravagant mansions and vacation houses all along Manhattan and Long Island. At the same time these families enjoy a rich lifestyle, the low-class workers live under extreme poverty and terribly unsanitary conditions. Events like this led to the creation of a huge gap between the social and economic classes of the era.
Within the business aspects of the Gilded Age, the American economy grew by more than 400%, but only a few individuals profited from this. As there were many poverty-stricken newly immigrated Europeans, it was hard for them to succeed in any entrepreneurial endeavors.